Welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Sharon Stern. I'm an Assistant Division Chief and SIPP Program Director in the Social, Economic, and Housing Statistics Division at the U.S. Census Bureau. Today, we're going to present updates on SIPP's Modernization Program, providing new information about our current field test and the research that is setting the stage for more use of administrative data as a regular foundational element of the program. After the presentations, we will open the floor to discussion. I am joined today by three of my colleagues. Neil Bennett is the modernization lead for the Survey of Income and Program Participation that we love to call SIPP. She started working for the U.S. Census Bureau in 2020, initially focused on SIPP's wealth, retirement, and labor force participation content. Since then, her interests have expanded to all the topics across the survey. She is committed to streamlining SIPP's content and building a flexible, modernized survey program. Angelica Phillips is a survey statistician in the Survey Improvement Research Branch. Since joining the Census Bureau in 2023, she has led and contributed to research on linking administrative records with SIPP and on modernizing approaches to imputing missing survey data. Her research interests focus on improving statistical methods and data integration techniques to enhance the quality, accuracy, and representativeness of official statistics. Sandy Dietrich serves as chief of the Survey Improvement Research Branch. She leads a multidisciplinary team conducting research to improve the quality, utility, and accessibility of federal survey data through the integration of survey and administrative data sources. Since joining the U.S. Census Bureau nearly a decade ago, she has held positions across multiple program areas. In her current role, Sandy's leading work on modernizing survey programs through the application of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and advanced statistical techniques to improve data quality, enhance operational efficiency, and reduce survey error. Before handing the mic over to my colleagues, I'm going to spend a few moments providing some background and context for the modernization effort. As many of you know, the household survey environment is challenging and expensive. Regardless of mode, surveys have lower response rates than a decade ago. Differential non-response can lead to bias. In addition, the cost of in-person collection is also going up. At the same time, other data and technology offer opportunities. For instance, the Census Bureau systems allow more integrated multi-mode data collection. Additionally, the availability of administrative data from states and the federal government allows the Census Bureau to research and potentially implement novel strategies relating to reductions in response burden for the survey, improved data quality for topics with high item non-response, and new methodologies to reduce bias and increase sample representativeness. We developed a modernization vision to cover the work of this transition period. What does SIPP need to be? A trusted and timely source of data about the social and economic dynamics of people and households participating in and transitioning into and out of government assistance programs. Our modernization mission summarizes the new direction, building a modern, adaptable program that administers a timely household survey and leverages administrative records. On the right, nationally representative statistics are what SIPP program needs to produce. Annual and subannual dynamics of income, movements into and out of government transfer programs, family and social context of individuals and households, and the interactions between these items. This is the big picture. During the development of the new program, we want to always be pointing towards the data and products that are needed to meet our mission. This is a snapshot, a small version of the new program. We are bringing together new technologies, new data sources, and new statistical methods for the SIPP program. Neil will discuss in a few moments the 2026 SIPP Internet Self-Response Field Test. We are excited to share with you the field test objectives, data collection content, contact strategies, and planned evaluations. At this point, we're researching the demographic frame as a potential structure for integrating administrative data in SIP at various points in the program. Angelica and Sandy will present on joining the demographic frame with the current SIP. This important project lays the foundation for how future SIP will use administrative data. They will explain what the demographic frame is, and they will discuss their project goal, linkage methodology, and implications for the modernized program. One final note. I want to recognize the dedicated field staff that make it happen. The current household survey would not be possible without the field representatives who collect in person and over the telephone. While Neil will discuss our internet self-response test, the future SIP cannot achieve its mission without some in-person outreach to folks unlikely to respond by internet or to be found in administrative data. The goal of the program continues to be unbiased, nationally representative estimates of the household population. Now I'm going to turn it over to Neil.
Thank you, Sharon, for that introduction of our speakers and for providing an overview of SIP's modernization. Again, my name is Neil Bennett. I work on SIP modernization. In today's webinar, I'm going to spend some time talking about our 2026 SIP Internet Self-Response Field Test. Before I provide details of the field test itself, I want to highlight the fact that this field test underscores the work that goes into a data collection. Often, there's a lot of focus on what people at headquarters are doing to develop an instrument, research outcomes, but I also want to highlight that there is additional work done by those at our National Processing Center in order to print and send mailers. There's also, honestly, work that the respondents do to respond to the survey itself. Every single step of this process improves the SIP program, and we value the importance of that work that everybody puts into a data collection. In our April SIP modernization webinar, we shared this anticipated timeline for developing the modernized SIP program, starting with a small-scale field test in 2026 and ultimately building towards the full field test in 2028. Again, this is a proposed timeline which is conditional on budget and OMB approval. It is now July 2026, and I am really thrilled to say that as we are giving this webinar, we are also in the field with our limited internet self-response field test. It has taken so much work from many different people across the Bureau in order to make this happen, and we could not be more excited about the opportunity that this test serves for laying the groundwork towards the modernized SIP design. This field test is a small, nationally representative sample that contains a select number of months of data collection. In today's presentation, I'm going to focus on the 2026 field test and discuss the primary objectives for this test and how we plan to evaluate each objective and how that will inform the modernized SIP design. There are 5 primary objectives for the 2026 Internet Self-Response field test. They are the following. First, directly test outreach strategies related to the number and type of mailers sent to respondents. Second, evaluate a self-administered redesigned instrument containing a subset of SIP content. Third, evaluate the feasibility and potential benefits of using a 6-month reference period. Fourth, examine potential reductions in bias and respondent burden from the incorporation of administrative data. And finally, explore the feasibility of developing regular data products. In the following slides, I'll explain exactly how we approach each of these objectives and our plans for building the modernized SIP design based on what we have learned. When it comes to directly testing outreach strategies for the new Internet Self-Response collection, we are running 2 experiments over the course of collection. These experiments build on prior tests of outreach and aim to understand mailing cadences that could be better suited for a longer survey like SIP. As background, the 2026 field test is split into 2 samples of 50,000 addresses each. Half of the sampled households will have the opportunity to respond to the survey in July and August, and the other half of respondents will have the opportunity to respond to the survey in August and September. The split sample provides us with 2 separate experiments over each collection. Both sets of households will receive mailers over the course of the 2 months of their respective data collection. Our first test is to determine if sending one additional mailer as a final reminder improves response rates to the survey. As of early July, 50,000 households have received a number of letters and mailers prompting them to respond to the survey. Half of these households will receive up to 5 letters in the form of three letters and 2 pressure-sealed mailers. And a pressure-sealed mailer is a mailer with perforated edges that you can tear off. The other half of the July sample will receive 4 mailers in the form of 2 letters and 2 pressure-sealed mailers. Our second test is an experiment of the effect of a letter versus a pressure-sealed mailer as one of our contact strategies. Within the August sample of households, all will receive 4 total contacts. Half of the August households will receive 3 letters and 1 pressure-sealed mailer, whereas the other half of households will receive 2 letters and 2 pressure-sealed mailers. From this experiment, we plan to compare response rates for each mail-out strategy, both within and across months, allowing us to better understand which mail-out strategy works best for SIPP given the overall cost of that strategy. We are also focused on understanding the sample representativeness among households responding to a web-only instrument and how that may look over the course of each mailing strategy. Evaluating sample representativeness allows us to develop a better sample design and weighting strategy that best works with in-person interviewing among the non-responding households. These tests also inform the future outreach strategies for the web mode portion of the survey. As we build towards the full SIPP instrument, it is important to understand how key sections of the survey perform in the new multi-mode setting. To that end, our second objective is piloting the reduced set of SIPP content. In front of you is a flowchart that shows each section of the 2026 field test instrument. For those that know SIPP very well, you have likely noticed that this is not the full set of SIPP topics, but this covers, at a high level, some important aspects of SIPP. The 2026 field test starts by rostering household members at the time of interview. It will then ask a brief set of demographic characteristics that will allow us to develop weights for the data file. The next section is a very short set of residence history questions. The instrument then moves to employment section, focusing in on work arrangements, employment characteristics, and job search. We will then ask a standard short set of questions about disability, moving on to some basic questions related to Social Security programs. Finally, we ask the household about their food security and participation in food assistance programs like SNAP, WIC, and other food assistance. One question we set out to answer over the course of this redesign is whether there were similar topics we could co-locate within the instrument and how order effects may change from the reordering of topics. The co-location of topics may help the instrument to feel less burdensome, but we still want to explore if measures change in the wake of topic reordering. For example, in current SIPP, we ask about food assistance programs before asking about food security. And we want to know from the test, if we place food security ahead of food assistance, how does that alter our measures? While we're not directly running an A/B test on these order effects, we can still understand if there are any lessons learned from the new instrument ordering. Additionally, we plan on estimating item non-response and breakoffs within the instrument as a way to learn more about how individual sections are operating within the instrument. This field test gives us some time and some room for improvement. If we find that there are some potential pressure points within the survey, we can think very carefully about how to best measure that information without overburdening a respondent and getting them to that final survey completion. The third objective is about piloting a 6-month reference period. Earlier in the presentation, I spoke about how the first sample of households start their fielding period in July, and they have 2 months to respond to the survey. And then the second sample of households will start their fielding period in August, and will also have 2 months to respond to the survey. The legacy SIPP design will ask about the prior year, but in the 2026 Internet Self-Response Field Test, we are only going to ask about the prior 6 months. You can see on the screen how the reference period will change across the 2 separate samples of households. Piloting the new reference period allows us to develop an informed approach to how we think about rotation groups and our fielding periods in the new collection. Our researchers will have the opportunity to evaluate seam bias and the performance of monthly topics prior to a full collection. Collecting the shorter, overlapping reference periods also allows us to evaluate what's possible and what we could develop on a regular basis after each data collection. We are more concretely able to consider which products we could develop on a regular basis after each data closeout, but I'll cover this in a bit more detail later in this presentation. Our fourth objective is exploring the incorporation of administrative records into SIPP's survey lifecycle. In the April webinar, we showed this graphic as a way to highlight how we are innovating along every part of the survey lifecycle and finding creative yet appropriate ways to incorporate administrative records along the way. So I'm going to spend some time now highlighting where the 2026 field test allows us to consider the incorporation of these records. In the 2026 field test, when we developed our household frame, we enhanced the master address file with the demographic frame. This enhancement provided us with additional background information about households and provided us with a more informed decision on how to identify our low response strata households. Then, when we think about our editing and weighting process, SIPP has a long history of using tax records and administrative data in their imputation procedures. Here, we are thinking about ways that we can expand upon these procedures as we develop the edited public use file. Finally, we're thinking about how we can incorporate tax records and administrative data into our final data products. We're considering questions like, what blended variables or blended estimates can we develop if we use administrative records? And what would that look like in a final release capacity? Now, I do want to highlight that we have long-term plans of using administrative records along every aspect of the survey lifecycle. But because 2026 is a smaller field test that is more focused on piloting survey design and processing systems, we do not have the ability to incorporate or use administrative records everywhere. And we are planning on working towards leveraging administrative records in our non-response follow-up strategy and ISR survey in future iterations of SIPP. Along every single aspect, and as we build upon the 2026, thinking towards 27 and 28, we still have opportunities to continue to expand our administrative record usage, and we plan to do just that. So our current plans for incorporating administrative records informs our future decisions in a number of different ways. Where for our frame and sample, having that additional information about households improves the oversampling of the low response households that we identify. We're also thinking about how we can draw upon the demographic frame's person-place model in order to explore or follow movers in a more cost-effective way than what is currently done. For editing and collection, we would like to continue SIPP's tradition of using administrative records to improve our model-based imputation. But we also want to think about how we can reduce respondent burden with the use of administrative records. Finally, when we're thinking about our estimates and data products, we're exploring the creation of modeled variables and considering the development of blended estimates and data products. Our last objective for the 2026 field test is the development of regular data products. There's a whole host of data products that we are currently considering, but I just want to highlight that our planned evaluations are really honed in on program dynamics and labor force participation, where we want to estimate movement onto and off of key programs like SNAP and Social Security, especially with the new shorter reference period. We're also focused on measuring participation in multiple programs and what types of items we could develop, what types of products we could develop from that. When it comes to labor force participation, we're thinking about the mix of jobs an individual could work and how to best characterize work arrangements. This is in light of some new ways that we're measuring non-standard work arrangements, like gig work. We're also researching the development of a labor market tightness indicator to estimate when people are searching for work and when they are receiving job offers as a result of those searches. This helps to inform future decisions because it allows us to identify data products that we are releasing and the cadence of release for these products. When we think about regular data products, this could mean quarterly, monthly, every 6 months, or annually, depending on what's most appropriate for the data product and estimates. If we think of SIPP modernization as a building a new home, then the 2026 Internet Self-Response Field Test is laying the foundation for the program. This test, relative to the entirety of SIPP, is actually quite small. but it is mighty. Just as any home needs a solid foundation to rest upon, this field test lays the groundwork by piloting our IT systems, processing methods, and data collection methods. So this 2026 field test establishes that foundation, and we will use the next 2 years to build upwards towards the final SIPP program. And again, of course, this is all conditional on budget and OMB approval. So now I'll turn things back over to Sharon, who will open the floor up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. We're now going to pause our presentations for about 5 minutes for questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please type your question in the Q&A panel and send it to all panelists. Please don't send it to an individual panelist or we may not see your question. Now I'm looking and I don't see any questions in review, so I'm going to give you all a minute or so to type in a question, and if there are none at this time, we'll proceed. So, okay, Neil, this was our first question. I know this really wasn't part of your presentation, but could you explain how the data are made representative?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the data are made nationally representative through our sampling procedures. It's a matter of drawing sample for across the United States, and our survey methodologists have sampling procedures in place to ensure that that sample is distributed evenly across all areas of the U.S.
So thank you for that question. It is absolutely an issue for us as we go with the test is just internet self-response, and our weighting procedures are limited to who is in the survey. That is part of what we are testing. We are examining what available records can help us make those weights and help our data be fully representative. And then as we go into the future with our individual follow-up, next year there'll be additional procedures. I see a couple of other questions have popped up. Here's a question that says, is the subset of content that will be collected in the test the plan going forward as well, or will other SIPP content come back? Neil, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So again, we're taking a test and grow approach over the next couple of years. So 2026 is a very reduced set of SIPP content, and the plan is to build that out over time. So our thought is in 2027, we will incorporate more SIPP content into the survey. And then again, in 2028, think about another set of expansion. So
we have two other questions that are pending, which I'm going to try to answer very quickly so we can get on to our presentations. Sorry, now a third quickly popped up. Let me take the two I was going to take. One was, is there a list of the administrative records we'll be using? And that's such a great question because we have a set in-house already, and there are a lot of things we need to do to evaluate whether and how they can be used in our survey. So there isn't a single list. There are some that we know we have in-house that are available to us that we are investigating, like the SSA data that we've used in the past, or certain tax data that we have in-house. We are also really pushing on other records like Medicare and Medicare, pardon me, Medicaid and Medicare records, for instance, or state level programs. So there's not a single list. Thank you for the question. We are working on that, and in future presentations, we will be publishing the research from those evaluations. There was a question here about noise reduction, and I assume that that is referring to the new departmental policy on how we do disclosure avoidance. And this is a big and important question. That's why I want to acknowledge it here and provide some answer to it. The fact is that our tests this summer, those data were not going to be public use data. So this isn't an immediate concern for the modernization program. Of course, the new environment and how we go about our disclosure avoidance is very important to us as we think about the 2027 test and what we will be able to produce and release from that test. So we don't have an answer yet, but please know that we are thinking about that. We are aware of the context in which we need to be producing these files, and we are considering all options for how we can go forward in a productive and important way in releasing these data. So thank you all for the questions. If we have time at the end, I will try to get to some of the others. But for now, I need to close up our questions and hand this over to Angelica and Sandy so they have time to talk about their project, which is incredibly important to where modernization is going. So I'm handing it over to you, Angelica.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sharon and Neil. My name is Angelica Phillips, and I'm here today with my co-author, Sandy Dietrich. And today we're presenting on some of the research we've been conducting on joining the Census Bureau Demographic Frame with the Survey of Income and Program Participation. So just as a disclaimer, the estimates we're presenting today are unweighted and therefore can only be generalized to the specific cohort of SIPP respondents that we're analyzing. Additionally, the results that we present today have also been approved for disclosure through the Census Disclosure Review Board. So the motivation for this research project comes from the ongoing modernization efforts for the SIPP, which my co-presenters very eloquently just spoke about just now. For this project, we're specifically thinking about the ways that we can improve SIPP data collection and processing using administrative records, and by using these records to enhance our model data products. The enterprise initiatives at the Census Bureau present us some great opportunities to readily use these administrative records through the enterprise data lake, as well as using integrated data products such as those created by the Frames program to enhance the processing and creation of SIPP data. These efforts allow us to work towards our goal of reducing respondent burden while ensuring high-quality data products for data users like many of you today. This project is an initial step in investigating the extent to which we can use administrative and auxiliary records to improve SIPP processing, specifically focusing on the integrated data products produced by the Frames program. The Frames program is a Census Bureau initiative to create enterprise frames on 4 content areas, which then serve as foundational data sources to use in a variety of contexts, including sampling and data editing. The 4 frames are geospatial, business, job, and demographic frames, and today we're going to be focusing on the demographic frame specifically. So the demographic frame is a data set of persons and addresses, and this is produced from a combination of multiple administrative records from state and federal governments, as well as third-party data sources, with census and survey records being used to train the models that probabilistically assign addresses to people. And so now I'm going to take a closer look at the contents and the methods that are used to create this demographic frame, as well as how we can utilize this in our SIPP modernization efforts. Like I mentioned, the demographic frame uses what's called person-place models to produce person-address pairs, and these indicate the most likely address for a given person at a specific point in time. And because these models are probabilistic and not deterministic, people and addresses can both appear more than once in the demographic frame, which means this is a long-form cross-classified data set, which I'll go into a little bit more in a moment. One benefit of the demographic frame is that it allows for the linkages of individuals and addresses across multiple data sets, which can help us connect this information as well as administrative records to demographic surveys such as the SIPP. An additional application for the demographic frame could be to use it as a sampling frame for population surveys and to assist with data editing and imputation. One substantial strength of the demographic frame is that it can serve as an intermediary data set, and this can connect individuals and households to other data, including other survey records and administrative records. And this linkage through the demographic frame can then allow us to utilize the data that's already available within the federal government to then create rich blended data products and potentially shorten surveys to reduce respondent burden. Now, keeping in mind our goal to investigate how the demographic frame can be used to support SIPP modernization efforts, we have 3 aims for this research project. The first is to just join the SIPP and the demographic frame, and then also discuss the critical decisions that had to be made in this process. And we link these data sets at both the person and address level. The second aim is to assess the linkage rates, which we then used to join these two data sets, also differentiating between person and address level linkages. And then finally, we compare the person and address level demographic characteristics in these data sets to assess the degree of concordance in these measures. And also, just for ease of presentation, we're going to be using the terms addresses and households interchangeably. The technical unit of analysis is later described later in this presentation. The data that we're using for this project is the 2019 through 2023 SIPP and demographic frame files, with each of these years being analyzed separately. At both the person and household level, we focus on the demographic characteristics that appear in both the SIPP and demographic frame, which are sex, age, race, and Hispanic origin. At the person level, we're looking at these characteristics for each respondent, but at the household level, these characteristics are aggregated across the individuals within that household. So for instance, instead of an individual person's age, at the household level, we're looking at the mean age within that household. For sex, race, and Hispanic origin, we're looking at the proportion of individuals who fall into each of these demographic categories within a household, sex of the respondent, male or female, and then Hispanic origin categorized as being of Hispanic or Latino origin or not being of Hispanic or Latino origin. On the other hand, the race variables in the two data sets did require some amount of recoding in order to harmonize the values between the SIPP and demographic frame. The selected race variable in the SIPP is measured as white alone, Black alone, Asian alone, and a residual category. And the alone part of this variable refers to having that singular race as opposed to multiple racial categories. The selected race variable in the demographic frame also has white alone, Black alone, and Asian alone. However, we also have some other detailed categories that were then harmonized into a single residual category. These categories are American Indian or Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander, some other race, and then a category for 2 or more races. And these final 4 categories in the demographic frame were then collapsed into that single residual category in order to have harmonized values between the SIPP and demographic frame. At the household level, we have household size, which is measured as the count of person-level records within a household. And this is just an aggregation of person records in each data set, so there's no missing data for this variable. For age, we're looking at the mean age among non-missing values within that household. And then for each of the categorical outcomes, sex, race, and Hispanic origin, we have the categories as they appeared within the person-level records, and then we calculated the proportion of each of these categories within a household. But then of note, there is also an additional category for each of these variables, which is the proportion of those with a missing value for each of the variables. So for sex, for instance, we're looking at the proportion of males, proportion of females, and then the proportion of individuals who have a missing value for sex within a household. And we did this because we wanted to think about the amount of missing data in a household as being informative, where households with greater amounts of missing data may differ from those with lesser amounts of missing data. And this approach can inform how we can use the demographic frame in the imputation of missing survey data. So now going back to the first aim, let's talk about the process that we used to join these two data sets and the critical decisions we made along the way. To prepare the SIPP for person-level linkages, we first had to add the unique person-level identifiers that are used to link individuals to the demographic frame. And these identifiers are called protected identification keys, or PICs, and are a constant for a given person throughout all records they have within the Census Bureau. These PICs are not in these SIPP panel files, and so we had to append them by linking SIPP records with what's called the SIPP consolidated crosswalk. This crosswalk contains PICs as well as person and household level identifiers as they appear in the SIPP panel files. So for the household, that is SSUID, and the person identifier is the PNUM within a household. And this unique combination of SSUID and PNUM allows us to link individuals to their PIC within that crosswalk. These PICs are assigned to people through the Person Identification Validation System, or PVS process. And this uses a lot of information from records collected by the Social Security Administration, such as an individual's social security number, date of birth, and name, to probabilistically assign these PICs when there's a high enough confidence in linking that person's records to their administrative records. In this PVS process, if it's not confident enough in linking a person to an administrative record, that individual may not actually be assigned a PIC. So because of this, not all respondents are assigned a PIC and therefore cannot be linked to person-level records in the demographic frame. Address level matches, on the other hand, in the demographic frame are performed using master address file identifiers, or MAFIDs, and these uniquely identify addresses across Census Bureau records. Because every address in the SIPP is assigned a MAFID, all households can theoretically be linked to the demographic frame. And then although the technical unit of analysis for these address level linkages is MAFIDs, we're going to be using the term MAFID, address, and household interchangeably throughout the remainder of this presentation, just for ease of discussion. So in order to prepare the demographic frame to join with the SIPP, person level linkages are again done using PICs, and then address or household level linkages are done using MAFIDs. But because the demographic frame is provided as a single file where one row is a person address pair, we needed to restructure this file into separate person level and address level files before actually being able to link this to the SIPP. Like I mentioned earlier, the person address pairs in the demographic frame are created from person place models, and these are trained using PIC MAFID pairs from the American Community Survey to predict the probability that a given person resides at a given address for a given reference date. And as a result, the individuals in MAFIDs can appear more than once in the demographic frame. And so while each person or PIC can be assigned to more than one MAFID, each PIC is assigned one and only one best MAFID from these models. In order to restructure the demographic frame for these person level linkages, we had to create a file where each person appears once and only once, so we don't have duplicated records. And this here is a fake data set to show the structure of the demographic frame and how we then restructured it for these linkages. So here we have PICs in one column and MAFIDs in another, and each of these rows is a PIC MAFID pair, which means persons and addresses can both be repeated. So because each PIC has one and only one best MAFID assignment, we selected only the cases that are considered the best MAFID assignments, which result in a data set where each person, in this case persons 1, 2, and 3, only appear once. Then to aggregate our data set into household level measures, we take those person level measures and then calculate the mean in the case of continuous variables, or the proportion for each categorical variable within each household. And within the demographic frame, we utilized only those best MAFID assignments in order to prevent the duplication of persons across their different addresses. One limitation of choosing these best MAFID assignments is that this assumes the best assigned MAFIDs from the person place models are true representations of the actual household occupants. And with the SIPP aggregation at the household level, we're similarly aggregating person level records into their addresses, but in the SIPP, we're also including respondents who are not assigned a PIC. Like I mentioned earlier, PICs are assigned to as many respondents as possible, but in some cases, a respondent may not actually be assigned a PIC. This approach allows us to leverage as much person-level data as possible within these SIPP files, but that comes with the limitation that this can include people who are structurally not available in the demographic frame because they don't have a PIC assigned to them. So this means that a household's composition may not necessarily align when comparing the SIPP and demographic frame, which is one reason that we're analyzing these household characteristics in the two data sets. Like I was showing earlier with the person level aggregation, this is the same mockup of the same records in the demographic frame, but this time it's sorted by MAFID instead of PICs. So you can see that MAFID A has 3 person records, but none of these people are considered best assigned to that address. Household B also has 3 records, but only 2 of those 3 individuals are considered best assigned to that MAFID. And household C has only 1 record, and that 1 record is considered best assigned to that address. So then when we aggregate up to the address level, we take only those best assigned individuals for that address. Household A in this case then has a household size of 0 with missing values for all of the demographic characteristics because there weren't any individuals that were best assigned to that address. Households B and C also aggregate across the PICs that were best assigned to them. So then we have the mean and the proportion of each of these categories across those best assigned cases. And also, as a note, these household aggregation processes are similar to what we did with the SIPP data, with the exception being that the household aggregations in the SIPP also includes respondents without a PIC. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the linkage rates whenever we joined these two data sets. There we go. So at the person level, we're again joining these data sets using picks. And as a reminder, this can be done only for the SIPP cases that were assigned a pick. And across the different data years, we find that between 96 and 98% of SIPP respondents who do have a pick can be linked to the demographic frame. And again, just for emphasis, not all SIPP respondents are actually assigned a pick, so these linkage rates don't represent all SIPP respondents. At the household level, we're again joining these cases using MAF IDs, which are available for all addresses in the SIPP. And across the 5 years of data that we analyzed, we find that between 93 and 95% of addresses in the SIPP can be linked with the demographic frame. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sandy to talk about the comparison of the demographic frame characters, or the demographic characteristics in the SIPP and demographic frame.
Great. Thank you, Angelica. I am Sandy Dietrich, and I will be discussing AIM 3 and will conclude the presentation with a summary and a discussion of our findings. For AIM 3, we compared demographic characteristics between the SIPP and the demographic frame, both at the individual and household levels. To start, I will discuss the comparison analysis conducted at the individual level. For this, we utilized the linked person file that Angelica mentioned earlier in the presentation. We compared demographic characteristics available in both SIPP and the demographic frame. For categorical variables such as race, sex, and Hispanic origin, we performed chi-square tests of independence and found statistically significant associations between the SIPP and demographic frame across these categories. However, for age, which is a continuous variable, the paired t-test revealed a significant difference between the SIPP and demographic frame. This significant difference in age does not necessarily indicate meaningful practical differences. Given the large sample size in this study, even minor differences tend to be detected. Therefore, examining the age distributions across the two data sources provide insight in how closely the overall patterns and shapes align. As you will see in the next slide, the distributions appear highly comparable. So here, this graph compares the age distributions for the SIPP and demographic frame. The distributions visually appear very similar and nearly overlap, suggesting a high degree of agreement between the two sources. Additional statistical testing is needed to quantify the extent of that similarity, but this visual representation offers an initial view of the data shape from both sources and their close resemblance. Additionally, it is important to mention how missing data were handled for these comparison analyses. For these person-level comparison analyses, missing data were excluded on a characteristic by characteristic basis. So sample sizes vary depending on the demographic characteristic, since analyses used only available responses. In contrast, for the upcoming household-level comparison analyses, which I will discuss shortly, missing data was retained across all characteristics, resulting in consistent sample sizes across all demographic characteristics. This distinction is important because missing data can impact the findings. This is a point I will revisit later in the presentation as a potential limitation of our study. For the comparison analysis of household-level demographic characteristics, we used the link household file. We performed independent sample t-tests and observed significant differences in the demographic characteristics between the two data sources. However, this does not necessarily indicate practical differences, as will be demonstrated shortly in the next slide, with a graph showing the household-level mean age distributions for both sources. Before that, I want to discuss possible reasons why the differences across characteristics are statistically significant. One reason is, again, the large size of our sample, which makes it sensitive to even the smallest differences. Additionally, since we treated missing data as substantive categories, the variation in the amount of missing data may also contribute to the significant differences observed. Here is a visual comparison of the distributions of household mean age for both the SIPP and demographic frame. While the visual similarity differs from the earlier graph showing person-level age data, the distributions of mean age still exhibit a comparable shape, with some areas where the distributions overlap. Again, further statistical analysis is required to evaluate the degree of these overlaps. I will now provide a summary of the study's findings across all aims. As you may remember, for aim 1, we discovered that when linking the SIPP with the demographic frame, several key decisions had to be considered. First, determining how to restructure the data sets to enable appropriate person and address-based linkages. Since our data sets were cross-classified with individuals possibly appearing multiple times, we restructured them so that each row represented only one person or one address, rather than multiple observations per individual. Second, deciding how to select the best address assignment for an individual. Because each person is linked to multiple addresses, we use the random forest model output available in the demographic frame as the best address assignment, although other person-place models are available in the demographic frame. And finally, third, figuring out how to consolidate person-level records into an address-level data set. Several factors needed consideration here, such as whether to include only those individuals best assigned to an address or also those not best assigned. For this study, we included only those best assigned. Additionally, there was the choice of whether to include only those individuals with a PIC in the SIPP who could be matched to the demographic frame, or to keep everyone regardless of their PIC status. We decided to maximize the amount of data available by retaining all individuals, whether they had PICs or not. And lastly, we needed to determine how to handle missing data, whether to exclude cases with missing information or keep them. Once again, we chose to use as much data as possible and included all cases, even those with missing data. For aim 2, after successfully linking the two data sources, we evaluated the linkage rates at both the person and household levels. We observed high match rates in the 90% range for both levels. While a 100% match rate would be ideal, it is neither expected nor typical when linking independent data sources collected using different methodologies. In addition, some SIPP cases do not have a PIC and therefore cannot be linked to the demographic frame. Differences in the reference periods between the SIPP and demographic frame may also contribute to unmatched records. And then there is aim 3, which focused on comparing demographic characteristics between the SIPP and demographic frame at both the person and household levels. We found significant differences for several household level characteristics and for age at the person level. However, the categorical characteristics at the person level were strongly associated across the two data sources. There are several important considerations when interpreting these findings. First, the large sample size increases the likelihood of detecting even very small differences as statistically significant. However, statistical significance does not necessarily imply practical significance. For example, the kernel density plots for age at both the person and household levels showed visually similar distributional shapes across the two sources. Second, differences in missing data rates between SIPP and demographic frame may influence the results. And then finally, differences in reference periods between the two data sources may affect the information available at the time of analysis. Regarding the limitations of this study, we highlight several points. First, the SIPP and demographic frame data are collected for different operational purposes and reference periods. Some of the differences observed might be due to timing and conceptual discrepancies between the two sources rather than measurement errors. Another limitation is that the study concentrates on demographic matches among individuals and households rather than on geographic distributions, which could ultimately inform sample design decisions. Third, as mentioned earlier, missing data were treated as substantive outcomes when calculating address level characteristics, which might have contributed to the significant differences in these characteristics. And finally, address level estimates in the SIPP include individuals without an assigned PIC who are not present in the demographic frame, potentially contributing to the significant differences observed in household level estimates. As for directions for future research, this study represents an initial effort to assess the linkage between the SIPP and demographic frame. Additional evaluations are necessary, including examining unlinked cases and exploring sources that might clarify demographic discrepancies between the SIPP and demographic frame. It would be beneficial to repeat our analyses using other SIPP data years and updated demographic frame extracts. Furthermore, it is important to study how the observed similarities and differences impact practical applications such as sample design, weighing, and adjustments for non-response. Lastly, since the demographic frame has been linked to other surveys, like the American Community Survey, comparing the linkage between the SIPP and that of the American Community Survey would provide valuable insights. The linkage between SIPP and demographic frame has important implications for the future modernization of SIPP across several stages of the survey lifecycle. First, in survey production, the linked data can be used to validate information collected through SIPP, improve data quality, support editing procedures, and enhance the imputation of missing data. These capabilities can lead to more accurate and complete survey estimates. Second, the linked data can inform sample design by helping identify demographic groups that may be underrepresented or require targeted data collection efforts. This information can support more efficient and effective sampling strategies. Third, linking SIPP to demographic frame creates new opportunities for the use of administrative records. The linkage can help identify which respondents have PICs for integration to other administrative data sources. In addition, demographic frame contains some administrative information that could possibly supplement survey responses or potentially replace selected survey questions. This could reduce survey length and lessen respondent burden while maintaining data quality. Finally, the integration of SIPP, demographic frame, and administrative records expands research and analytical opportunities. Access to richer data combined with improved validation and imputation methods can provide more complete and higher quality information. This enhanced data environment enables researchers to address a broader range of research questions and generate deeper insights than would be possible using the SIPP alone. Thank you. That concludes our presentation. I will now turn it over to Sharon to start the discussion segment of the webinar.
Thank you. I'm happy to rejoin you all. It's so important to fully understand the benefits and limitations of using administrative data with SIPP, recognizing that choices and assumptions need to be made. There are practical decisions that have to happen in order to do implementation. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the clock and I don't think we have time actually for questions. There is one left over in the chat from earlier asking about the expected implementation of the new redesigned SIPP and whether the current structure will continue. And I do want to address that question very quickly. Neil presented earlier a slide that showed our planned growth in our testing. Next year in 27, we hope to have a an in-person follow-up section. It'll still be a test. In 2028, it'll be a full-scale test. So that's sort of our grow and implementation plan. With regard to the current, I want to make sure everybody on the call is aware that we will be having a Federal Register notice posted, hopefully within the next couple of months, that will fully explain what is happening with the SIPP program so that you can understand how we will be handling the current and modernized program. Today was our second webinar in what we hope is going to be an engaging series. Our plan is to share program updates and results 3 to 4 times a year. To make this session interesting to you, we need your feedback. So after this session, you'll be receiving a request to complete an evaluation. We're aware that the form may not completely align with the session because it's focused really on learning for training webinars, but we still encourage you to use the form to the extent relevant. We're also strongly encouraging you to reach out to us directly, and with your feedback, we can enhance the future program. We're showing our individual email addresses up here, as well as the program inbox. And if you haven't already, please sign up for GovDelivery if you'd like to receive announcements for what is happening with the program. And finally, I just can't say thank you enough. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. It was a pleasure having you.